Good afternoon. The hearing session is now open. It forms part of the examination of the Waverley Local Plan Part 2. My name is GJ Fort and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination and to report to the Council in due course. Before we continue with the discussions this afternoon, if I could ask the representatives of the Council to introduce themselves, please.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Wayne Beglan of Council for the Local Planning Authority, and with me this afternoon, Mrs. Nash, Mr. Ellis and Dr. Riley behind me. And then, sir, I'm hoping on the Zoom as well, from Atkins, Mr. McEntee, Mr. McLeod, and from Wood Consulting, Mr. Deanwood as well.
And others in the room, please.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Jesse Chapman of D&M Planning.
Good afternoon, Andrew Munson from Reside.
Good afternoon, Karen Tipper, Bell Cornwall on behalf of Martin Grant Homes.
Good afternoon, Michael Wood, WSP, on behalf of Ptarmigan Land.
Good afternoon, Richard Moles, Counsel for Waits Developments.
Good afternoon, sir. Judith Ashton for Waits Developments.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Peter Cleveland of Henry Adams and acting for Castle Properties Limited.
Good afternoon, sir. Estelle DeHon, QC on behalf of Ashhill Land.
Chris Roberts of Boyer Planning, also on behalf of Ashhill Land.
Just advise Mr. Cleveland, I can't see your nameplate, so if you do turn it on its side. Yeah, that's better, thank you. And those joining us on the Zoom feed, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Laura Black from Tetra Tech Planning, representing Elm Group.
Thank you. And I've got the Mr. Beglan introduced the council representatives who are joining us on Zoom. So Charlotte Glance is the programme officer for the examination, and she should be the main point of contact prior to and after the hearing sessions and should be copied into all correspondence. So if I could ask Charlotte, please, to do our usual housekeeping remarks.
Afternoon, everybody. This is just a fire procedure that I need to read out. So in the unlikely event of a fire or other serious incident, the alarm in this building is a siren. If alarms are inoperative or inadvisable in a bomb emergency, the instructions to leave the building will be given by word of mouth. If the alarm sounds, leave by the nearest safe fire exit. Please note the positions of fire exits from this room. Do not stop to reclaim personal effects. Do not use the lift and proceed to the assembly point, which during the daytime is at the far end of Bury's playing field opposite the council offices until 6:30 in the evening. And then after 6:30, it's Waitrose car park, and remain at the evacuation point and until instructed that it is safe to re-enter the building. And the toilets are through this corridor, turn right, and then they're on the right-hand side. Thank you.
A reminder to everyone, if they could switch their phones on or turn them to silent, please. The hearings are being filmed and live streamed. I take it everyone here is comfortable with that. So the matters to be discussed today will be focused questions based upon and taking forward the matters, issues and questions and associated written statements received. If in the course of the discussion you wish to highlight certain parts of your statement or other documents that form part of the examination, then it will be helpful to me if you can provide the references. Those present in the room should use the microphones when speaking to me, and those joining us on Zoom will have to make sure that they are unmuted when speaking to me, but muted at all other times. If you wish to make a contribution in the room, if you could indicate this by turning your nameplate on its side. And for those on Zoom, if you could use the hands up tool that's available on there. Any of those joining us on Zoom experience technical difficulties, they should make contact with the programme officer in the first instance. So are there any questions at this stage about any procedural aspects of the hearing? Okay, so if we could continue now onto our discussion of matter 8, which relates to the site allocations in Milford and Whitley. Following on from the questions are posed in the MIQ document. So by way of an introduction to this topic, I'd like the Council's general view on whether the site allocations are deliverable over the planned period and whether they effectively guide the development of the sites in a clear and unambiguous way. It would be helpful to me also if you could highlight any main modifications that have been proposed and the soundness issues that these seek to address.
Thank you, sir. So in the parish of Whitley, which includes the village of Milford, we are proposing 3 sites for allocation. They are land at Highcroft, Wheeler Street Nurseries, and the land at Secrets. With each of these sites, we consider that the full allocation as proposed in the plan can be delivered within the plan period. And there's compelling evidence to suggest that is achievable. With each of the sites, we have set out a policy for each, which directs development in the way that we would wish it to be achieved on the site and takes into account any specific constraints or mitigation that needs to occur to ensure that that development is achievable. In regard to modifications suggested, we have a modification more generally on the Milford and Whitley sites, which seeks to update the numbers which we discussed earlier on today, and we're going to discuss in the session later next week. So I won't dwell on that. And then in terms of the site-specific allocations, we have a small modification to the land at Wheeler Street Nurseries allocation to reference the heritage assets on that site to ensure they're taken into account of when development is taking place. We then have a small modification to part B of the land at Secrets policy, which is to use the word conservation rather than safeguarding, which is in line with national policy. And then the key constraints have also been updated to take account of the heritage assets. There is a small modification to the site boundary, as it previously incorrectly took into account a very small proportion of the site which isn't promoted for development, so that's been excluded. And then there is a modification to alter the reference to a DPD to an SPD, and our representation on this topic explains why we've made that change. And then finally, for consistency purposes, we've also referenced custom and self-build plots as we have on other sites within the plan.
Thank you. We didn't get on to discuss this point this morning. We discussed in general the trajectory of delivery, but I posed the question previous, and this relates really to the previous matter, but it's sensible to raise it in relation to the allocations, but it might be a more general point. That there's the framework talks about rates of delivery on specific sites. So as part of that work you're doing, might it be sensible to introduce those rates of delivery into the allocations, not just here, but throughout the plan to assist in one, monitoring of the policies in terms of their effectiveness. I just wonder whether you've got any reactions to that.
Thank you, sir. We'd be more than willing to add that information in, because that information is held by us and will be presented to you later today or early tomorrow. So if you think a modification would be appropriate to present that information within the plan, we're more than happy to do that.
So you talked about the modification suggested in terms of the requirement for a separate development plan document. This relates to the DS14 site secrets. So could you just outline what the modification, what the position on that is now, please?
Thank you, sir. So previously the reference had been that a development plan document would be prepared for the site, and in hindsight we realised that that terminology was possibly not correctly used, and that was pointed out to us through consultation responses, and we're proposing that it would be more appropriate for a supplementary planning document to be prepared for the site. We consider that this is justified given that the site is planning to comprise multiple uses, multiple different parts of the development, including residential, commercial in terms of the farm shop, and although not included within the allocation, there is potential for a new health facility to be provided, as has been suggested by the promoters themselves. And we consider that the SPD would help guide development comprehensively and would avoid a piecemeal approach being adopted.
And do you have any view on when the production of that SPD might take place?
So the SPD is something we're hoping to start preparing following the hearings, with the aim to consult on it following the adoption of LPP2. So the hope is that it would be ready for as soon as the plan and the allocation is adopted, ready for consultation, ensuring that no delay to the delivery of the site is incurred.
Mr. Wood.
Yeah, just to come back on that point, I mean, we welcome the downgrading of the reference to DPD, but we still consider an SPD to be onerous for a site of this size and scale. I mean, I mentioned this morning, we've been working with officers for the past kind of 9 months to prepare a planning application and a master plan for the site as a single scheme, and that's been achieved. So an SPD is wholly unnecessary and will just delay housing on the site coming forward.
Ms. Ashton.
Just lost my tobe around, sir. Thank you, Andrew. Just really a point of clarity, if I may, in terms of the proposed main modification. The wording refers to consideration should be given to, and I'm just wondering how effective that is in policy terms for those knowing exactly what is meant by the policy. The second point, the council have actually suggested that even though it's been changed from a DPD to an SPD, it will still be subject to public consultation. I'm not clear that that is actually clear within the modification itself, or will be set out within the reason justification to the policy. And again, some clarity on that might be of assistance. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. Just to endorse what's just been said by Miss Ashton, but just to add that the inference from the council's comment and their statements as to the requirement for a DPD or indeed an SPD for this sort of site suggests to me that they consider it to be strategic in nature. They describe it as complex and multifaceted with a wide range of uses. To me, that with reference to what we've discussed in previous matters, that just provides evidence of this being strategic in nature.
So in terms of the wording there, I know I'll reflect on what Ms Ashton said as I considered that main modification, but in terms of the consideration should be given, is it clear what types of things might inform that consideration? So if there's a planning application comes in with a master plan, might that override a kind of supplementary planning document? Is that the kind of leeway that the policy is seeking to achieve?
Yes, sir, exactly that. We don't want the requirement in the policy to impede the delivery of the site, and if something satisfactory comes before us that sets out that level of detail that we're expecting to be delivered, then that would be something that we don't want the policy to require that element, and hence the wording has been given that flexibility is available.
Mr. Munton.
Thank you. Flexibility is one thing, but I think some certainty is required on this point. The main reason for that is other sites have been excluded for apparently not having other social benefits. And if these aren't guaranteed or going to be delivered, then this is just another housing site.
Okay. Views on that point, and is there enough in the policy itself as written that requires those wider benefits?
Thank you, sir. So the policy does set out multiple aspects that are expected through this allocation other than housing. It specifically does not set out a requirement for a health centre, and that is something that we've been very clear about in the policy, because that is something that the developers are choosing to provide as part of the development rather than something we are relying on. So this policy is trying to set out the mechanism of how the development will come forward in terms of the SPD, rather than, and the actual policy itself sets out what we're expecting to come forward. And in regards to other sites, we have assessed each site on the information presented to us, including any proposed benefits that would result from that. And that has been assessed as part of the work that's set out in the housing topic paper, which details aspects such as that within the table.
Mr. Wood.
Yeah, sorry, I think your question probably preempted my comment, that the details of what's required by the site is set out clearly within the allocation, so that there is the certainty that those elements can be delivered. And again, I reiterate, there is no need for an SPD to be produced to enforce that, as is demonstrated by the planning application that's been prepared for the site that delivers all of the requirements of the policy and more.
Thank you. So there's an application related to delivery of Sang site that's just over the border in Guildford. Is there any further updates on that application at the minute?
Thank you, sir. As far as I'm aware, Mr. Wood will correct me if I'm wrong, but that application is still pending with Guildford and there's no further updates to date.
Yeah, that's correct. We lost our officer as the application was due to be determined, which has slowed the process down. So sure you can sympathise with us. We have had, I think, since the MIQs were published, Natural England have responded to the application now. They've confirmed that they're broadly happy with the layout and the proposed arrangements for the Sang. The application followed extensive pre-application engagement with Natural England to confirm the strategy for the Sang and to make sure it delivered the capacity required for the development. Natural England's only outstanding comment is just ensuring that the management arrangements are appropriately set out, and we're working with Guildford to resolve that now.
Is Natural England's position on that in the public domain, Mr. Wood?
It is, yeah, it's on the planning register, but we can send it directly to you, yeah.
Yes, please, thank you. If we could have that added to the examination library as well, please. So there were some concerns about the potential for that SANG to use a car park that wasn't in control. Is that correct, Mr. Roberts? It's not in control of Ptarmigan?
Yes, so just to provide a bit of an update. So it's my client Ash Hill controls the Eashing Lane SANG, which is the other side of the road from the proposed SANG that Ptarmigan envisage. And yes, it does appear that they, in essence, rely on that car park, and they also seek to provide a circular walk through that SANG. Now, obviously, there's a commercial discussion potentially around how that works as a separate discussion from planning. But I'd be interested, I think, to know if Natural England, in considering the application for SANG, have raised any comment on that in the discussions with you, and if they view the SANG as proposed as an extension to Eashing Lane. Do they see that in isolation? Have they just said, well, this is an interesting piece of SANG you've brought forward? Or have they said this provides mitigation for the proposals at Secrets?
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the car parking point, the SANG is obviously right on the doorstep of the development that the SANG is proposing to serve. It's also below the 10-hectare requirement for a SANG to have a car park, as set out in Natural England's guidance. So there's never been a requirement for the SANG to have a car park. That's been agreed with Natural England very early on. So we're not relying on the car park across the road at the Eashing Lane SANG. Simply, it's that a car park is not required for this SANG. And in terms of the circular walk, I mentioned extensive engagement with Natural England occurred before we submitted the planning application to Guildford, and it was primarily around the solution for the circular walk, and they are comfortable that the SANG that has been put forward has the capacity to mitigate the proposed development of Secrets and a bit more, and that the solution for the circular walk is acceptable. Now, the requirement or the guidance around the circular walk for Natural England is just that. It is guidance, not a hard and fast rule. And I'll point to the proposed SANG at Milford Golf Course being an example where the proposed SANG there didn't meet 3 or 4 of the respective guidance in terms of how close the paths and the walks were. That walk crossed the road as well, but it was still approved and accepted, and it would still deliver the mitigation intended.
Thank you. So, as I say, I look forward to receiving the Natural England response on that. And that'll be put in the examination library. So is there anything further on the SANG before we move on? Okay, so the allocation refers to a local centre, and you'll have seen my MIQs, I perhaps got the wrong end of the stick asking about retail needs, but can you see perhaps why I got the wrong end of the stick? So is there a modification that could be made to clarify really what is meant by that term?
Thank you, sir. I think, as you say, we're using the term local centre has resulted in some confusion, both within the representations we've received at regulation stages and in response to the MIQ reps. I think a different term can be used, but I think our intentions of what we're looking to achieve are set out within our response, and we'll go away and think of better wording. And I think that the promoters of the site are on board with what our intentions are in relation to the term local centre. We just need to think of wording that is perhaps a little clearer.
Thank you. So I've got no further detailed questions on the allocation for DS14. Is there anything further before we move on to the other allocations at this stage? So if we move on to the Wheeler Street allocation. So there's land at Wheeler Street Nurseries, the S13. Just wonder whether you could unpack the reasoning for the site yield that's given in the plan, given that the pending planning application seeks to deliver 17 units.
Thank you, sir. So throughout the promotion of the site, we have been informed by the developers that 20 units were achievable, and I am aware that planning applications have perhaps resulted in that number being amended throughout the process of the planning application. I think the number might have been amended throughout the planning application rather than being submitted necessarily as the current 17. We think that 20 could be achievable on the site if the type and size of the dwellings were amended to reflect that. However, if it would be key in helping, we would be willing to propose a main modification to adjust that if it would be key in the soundness, and in regard to numbers for Milford and Whitley, that would not result in a change that wouldn't mean that minimum requirement for the settlement wouldn't be met.
Okay, just to understand the rationale for that. So did the planning application came in for 20 and then subsequently it's whittled down to 17? And have you got any indications what the reasoning for that might be?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so just as way of background, we submitted the application on behalf of the applicant. It was originally promoted sort of ELAR call for sites type stages for around 20 units. We did the detailed work to lead up to a planning application, and the technical work undertaken, ecology principally and tree survey work, indicated that 20 is probably not achievable for the site. So the application was actually submitted just for the 17 units. It hasn't been amended in terms of numbers. There's been some design amendments, but actual numbers haven't been amended since its submission. But I suppose the point we want to make is the key thing is sort of around the wording of the policy. And if it's helpful just to turn to that. I don't know if you've got it in front of you or you want the page number. It's 149 of the local plan. I think there may be a word we're missing, but in the first sentence it says Wheeler Street Nursery, as identified on policies map, is allocated for at, and I think it should maybe say at least 20 dwellings. I think that's really just a reasonable typo just to point out. And I think the reason that we want to make a point of this, if it was a circa 20 dwelling or around 20 dwellings, we wouldn't have a problem. But I think the concern, the way that is drafted and at least 20 dwellings, we don't think we can achieve that. And the fundamental reason is it would require a removal of a section of woodland, which has got sort of three functions really. It contains a site from a landscape point of view on its northern boundary. It has its own inherent ecological value. And if we were to remove it, we couldn't effectively achieve a biodiversity net gain on site. So we took the view that to retain that, enhance it, and a scheme of 17 units with an appropriate sort of housing mix of 1 to 5 to meet those recommendations, we can only get to 17. If you were to produce a number of smaller units on the site which didn't meet recommended mix, you could probably get a higher number, but that would obviously fall down against other policies within the plan. So that's where we end up with the 17 units. So I suppose our request or our position is that the number should be changed to around 17 or circa 17, so we don't trip up when we come to determining the planning application that it needs to be at least 20 and we can't comply with it. So hopefully that assists you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. So that gives us some comprehensive reasons, doesn't it, to amend the number in there and the wording. So I think it'd be sensible to have a modification to that effect and to ensure that the policy is effective in those regards. Okay, so that concludes all my site-specific questions on these allocations. Is there anything further specifically on the allocations? Obviously, we're going to revisit general housing needs and supply matters next week, but specifically it relates to this.
So no, nothing from us. Thank you very much.
Any others? Ms. Black?
Yes, just to confirm that the site under policy DS12 is deliverable and developable. We've had pre-application discussions with the council who've confirmed that there's no technical issues or constraints to development. And it's our understanding that upon adoption of the LPP2, our client will be looking to submit a planning application to bring the site forwards. Thank you.
Thank you. So in that, so as we concluded my questions on that, thank you all for your contributions this afternoon. And this hearing session is now adjourned. We'll do our housekeeping session in about 10 minutes time. Okay. Thank you all. Okay, if we could resume just the action points session. So the first one I had was the P&CR report of Tandridge. Yeah, to be put onto the examination library. There was the appendix, wasn't there, to Inspector Boer's report? There was a work to update Appendix C of LPP1 and the related material there. And then, yes, related to that, a main modification to introduce a rate of development on the allocated sites. And then the main modification on the local centre point. I think that's everything I had.
So I think there was also a modification in relation to Wheeler Street.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it was the yield, wasn't it? The site yield.
And
Yeah.
did you have a preference of keeping it at around 20, or would you rather it be circa 17? Because I know both options were suggested.
Yeah, I think around 17.
Yeah.
Given what we know about the constraints on the site. So yeah, that was everything. Not that many actions for quite a long session this morning, but yeah. So thank you again for all your contributions, and we'll resume tomorrow at 9:30.
Thank you, sir. See you then.